Today, Thomas Friedman of the New York Times asked the Secretary of State whether do Jewish lives matter more than Palestinian and Muslim lives, Muslim and Christian, Palestinian Christian lives, given the incredible asymmetry in casualties and so on, to which the Secretary said with an emphatic no. You know. Now, tell us, how does that square with the fact that both the President and the Secretary of State said in statements marking the 100th day, talked about the ordeal of the hostages and so on, and not a single mention of 100,000 Palestinians dead, missing, or injured?
So
tell us how that square with that.
So, Saeed, I think you cannot take any one statement from any official in this administration in isolation and say that that reflects the totality of our opinion and the totality of what we have to say about the situation. And if you want to get specific about it, I will say that just 2 or 3 days before that statement came out, the Secretary was in Israel. And he talked about the fact that we are almost about to mark 100 days of this conflict. And if you go and look at the Secretary's remarks, he talked about the effect that this conflict has had on Israelis, and especially the families of Israeli hostages who have spent 100 days not knowing the status of their loved ones, not knowing if they're alive, not knowing the situation in which they're being held captive, not knowing if they will ever be allowed to come home and reunite with their loved ones. And he talked about what it's meant for Palestinians in Gaza, thousands of whom are mourning the death of loved ones, and thousands of whom are having to live in really intolerable humanitarian conditions. So the Secretary has spoken on a number of occasions, as has the President, about the toll that this conflict has taken on Israelis and on Palestinians. And it is what motivates the work that we in the administration have been doing to try to bring this conflict to an end in a way that ultimately establishes a just and lasting peace that ensures the security and the prosperity of both Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Today, the WFP program, the World Food Program, said that, there's actually a possible famine. The Palestinians face a possible famine, at a time when there are trucks laden with food and so on, and they're not getting in, simply because Israel makes it so. So, what is your position?
So we have been working very hard to address the quite dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. The Secretary made it a focus of this trip. It's something that was the subject of his meetings with Israeli officials. The Secretary went and toured a WFP warehouse in Amman, where food is being stockpiled and then delivered into Gaza for the benefit of Palestinian civilians. We are the first to say that more needs to be done. More needs to be done to break down some of the logistical difficulties that the UN has faced in delivering aid into Gaza. More needs to be done to get aid once it's inside Gaza to civilians, both in the south and in the north. We want to see more trucks move into the north, where we know, even though there are hundreds of thousands of people who haven't been able to go back to their homes, there are still Palestinians who are in the north who need access to food and water just as people in the south do. So we continue to work on this very difficult problem. Our special envoy, David Satterfield, is in the region working on that. As I said, he was engaged in meetings on this question just in the past few days, and it's something we'll continue to work through because it is a high priority for us.
And finally, in the same interview, the Secretary said, he was wondering what's to be done about Gaza. How about a ceasefire? I think that would resolve immediately, would probably resolve this tragedy.
So again, and we have obviously spoken about this before, we do want to see an end to this conflict. We want to see it as soon as possible, but we want to see an end to this conflict that's durable, and not an end to this conflict that leaves Hamas in place to, again, launch terrorist attacks against Israel. That's not something that's tolerable to Israel. It's not something that would be tolerable to any country. So we want to see an end to this conflict that ensures that October 7th can never be repeated. And that's why when the secretary was in the region, you saw him launch this effort to work with Arab partners and with Turkey to coordinate our efforts to reach a peace, not just for the short term, but that it eventually establishes a very clear path to a Palestinian state with tangible steps forward to ensure that there is a Palestinian state and real security assurances and security guarantees for Israel from the United States and from other countries in the region, because that is the only lasting solution, not just for the Palestinians, but for Israelis as well.